We're going to start with the Dallas Cowboys. For all of these, if you guys have not listened to the other division preview shows, we've been doing the offseason for each of these teams in 60 seconds. So let's hit that with the Dallas Cowboys. Lost Dan Quinn to Washington to be their head coach, hired Mike Zimmer to replace him as the defensive coordinator. They have not, as of this recording, extended Dak Prescott or CeeDee Lamb, both of whom are entering the final years of their deals. They signed Eric Kendricks, Ezekiel Elliott, and Linval Joseph about 2 hours ago in free agency this offseason. Brought back Jordan Lewis as well. They recently traded for Jordan Phillips, signed Carl Lawson, and traded for Andrew Booth of the Vikings. They lost Tony Pollard, Dorrance Armstrong, Tyron Smith, Tyler Biadasz, Stephon Gilmore, and Dante Fowler in free agency. In the draft, they went to get Tyler Guyton, tackle in the first round, Marshawn Nealon in the second round, and got Cooper Beebe, formerly a left tackle playing center for this team, in the third round. Anything else we need to mention with the Cowboys in your mind?
The Zeke one is so funny. Like, even as like a Zeke truther for the longest time, and I swear to God, he's still a useful player. It's just the funniest reunion, man. I love it.
That a semblance of free agents when you consider some of the other hauls around the league. The fact that Eric Kendricks and Ezekiel Elliott were the prizes of the free agent class for the Dallas Cowboys. It tells you all you need to know about the mood around their offseason this year.
Everybody on both sides brought back some of their old friends. You know, Dak gets Zeke back. Zimmer gets some of his old guys from Minnesota back. I mean, everybody.
Even with Mike Zimmer, here. It's a reunion in Dallas. I mean, he was in Dallas forever. So it's a building he's used to. Him and Jerry, go way back. Lots of love, a lot of warm feelings as these reunions happen in Dallas. For each of these teams, we've been doing a check-in just about how many blue chip players we think they have heading into the season. I think it's just a good way to think about teams. How many blue chip guys did you have for Dallas?
4 for sure. Dak, obviously, top 6, top 7 quarterbacks. CeeDee Lamb, Micah is obviously an easy one. Zach Martin is probably like not 100% of what he used to be, but still an incredible player. So I'll give it to
Zach
him.
Martin still very much deserves to be mentioned as a blue chip player.
He's still very much there. The one that gave me a little bit of iffiness was Tyler Smith. I think he's very close, but it's kind of just like maybe one more year. Maybe it's a little bit too fast for me. But he's a great player. I don't want to say that he's not.
I'm fine putting Tyler Smith in there.
I don't blame you. Like I could have gone either way.
I had 5, right? So Micah, CeeDee, Tyler Smith, Zach Martin. I'm not saying Dak is a top 6 quarterback like you're just ripping off right now, but I will comfortably say that he is a blue chip player when you look at the position overall.
I'm sticking to that. I could rattle him off if I needed to.
Red chip guys, a couple guys probably one step down from there. I don't think Diggs or Bland rises to blue chip level, but they've had really good stretches over the last couple of years. DeMarcus Lawrence getting a little bit older, but still a very good player for what he is. Anybody else worth mentioning kind of in that second tier for you?
No, those would have been the 3. Diggs is probably the closest in my mind.
What significant question marks on the roster on the depth chart does this team have? We've tried to do that as kind of a counterbalance to the blue chip guys for each of these teams that we've talked about.
I know they went and signed a name in Eric Kendricks, and they have a couple of young guys. Maybe they like at linebacker, but I'm still very curious to see if they're actually going to get good play out of any of those guys. I mean, last year they were playing Marquise Bell there, and he's not even going to play there now, which is a good decision, but it's still it's a change there. And then obviously running back, man. I mean, when you bring back Zeke and your other option is Rico Dowdle, fine bench player, but like if those are your 1-2 guys, it's like, all right, this is maybe not the firepower this team has been used to in years past.
I should have mentioned running back. I did not have that on my list. The spine of the defense is where I was going. We have off-ball linebackers. I mean, even with Linval Joseph there, I think we'll talk about Mozzie Smith a little bit later in the show. That's still a question. What's going to happen in the middle of that defense? And the other one I want to throw out, wide receiver depth. I mean, other than CeeDee Lamb and maybe Brandon Cooks, who's definitely getting long in the tooth, do we feel good about any of the other pass catchers on this team? Jake Ferguson's a nice player, but the wide receiver depth specifically, that would worry me a bit.
No, 100%. And Cooks is a guy who has long relied on his speed. And he's a good route runner, but like when you're a guy who's, wrong side of 30, relies on your speed, that could always go wrong a little bit. You never know. And then I didn't love what I saw from Jalen Tolbert last year. Like in the draft, I liked Ryan Flournoy as a 6th round pick, but you're not going to be like, this is our good wide receiver 3 immediately. Like, so definitely have some questions there.
The fact that Brandon Cooks is old now is so sad to me. I wrote a pre-draft feature about Brandon Cooks 10 years ago that involved me going to Beaverton, Oregon. Where the hell is Oregon State? Where is Oregon State?
Corvallis.
Corvallis. Yeah, in Corvallis. So it involved me going to Corvallis and also going to Stockton in California, which is where he's from. And the fact that that was 10 years ago now, and Brandon Cooks is in the back half of his career is deeply, deeply depressing to me.
Well, and what's funny is 5 years ago, he felt like he was 30 plus because he'd
Because
bounced
he's been
around so
traded
much.
20 times.
Yeah, exactly. He's been traded 20 times. He was always just like a guy who was in the news and stuff. So he felt like he'd been around longer than he was. But now he's actually at that age. So it does feel weird.
Man, as that keeps happening. I did a pre-draft feature on Leighton Vander Esch. Speaking of this team, he's retired now. Time is moving way, way too fast. For each of these teams, our biggest question as we get to this season, the way that we framed it is, what are you going to be watching with this team over the first month of the year? So for Dallas with me, I think it's how this group takes to Mike Zimmer's defense. I have some questions about the offense, but these are substantial changes that we're looking at on that side of the ball. I mean, the last time we saw Mike Zimmer not as a defensive play caller, obviously he was the head coach of the Vikings, but the last time we saw him as the architect of the defense, his team was 24th in cover one rates on early downs during his final year in Minnesota. I mean, the Cowboys were running man coverage and single high defense at one of the highest rates in the NFL. And so this is just a big, big shift for a team that was living in single high, that was living in man under Dan Quinn, to transition to a more traditional kind of typical defense that Mike Zimmer is probably going to run. And I just want to see how this group takes to it overall. What's your sense for how this personnel fits what Mike Zimmer wants to do on defense?
I mean, the pass rush unit, I think is going to be really good that he has guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. I think that's going to be great, especially Micah, because Zimmer has always been a guy who on third down kind of has some of the most creative stuff in the league. And a lot of that has involved his actual linebackers. But Micah is a guy who has played actual linebacker, really has more of like an off-ball linebacker body, and so can really probably move around a lot and do some of their most creative stuff. And so I'm most interested to see how that goes. I actually kind of like the corners for this. Bland is probably always going to be a guy who gets picked on a little bit for being a little too aggressive. But again, I think because Zimmer is so aggressive and creative on third down that it almost might work out for them, if that makes sense. Like you're almost kind of just leading into his aggressiveness and letting him do that. And then Diggs, I mean, he was a guy in college who kind of came from very similar style of coverage world. So I think he fits really well. I think the safeties kind of fit in really well. And mostly I'm just glad that they're playing real linebackers in the box this year. No shade to Marquise Bell. Actually think he's a solid safety, but I just can't do 215-pound linebackers, man.
I was talking to Al Harris, who's I believe their defensive backs coach in Dallas, and has done a really good job, obviously, developing players at that position. Their DBs have been fantastic. I mean, they've gotten the most out of pretty much everybody who's come through that room. Not just the guys they've drafted, but going to get somebody like Malik Hooker, whose career seemed like it was on the outs, getting the most out of Jaron Kearse for a couple years. Donovan Wilson gives them good snaps. We were just talking about the transition between that man-heavy world to what Zimmer's going to do, and he said for the outside corners, they're still living kind of in their own universes. So there's not a ton that's going to change for them. Like the way that they're going to play quarters is still going to be pretty aggressive. And, they're going to still be able to lean into the style that we've seen from them over the last couple of years. It really changes when you move to the spine of the defense, just because there's more communication. So that's the difference for them. And for those guys like Malik Hooker, for the guys like Donovan Wilson, is that there's just going to be more moving parts for them overall. So I do feel like there's going to be a little bit of a transition, but if they can still, like you said, lean into some of that aggressiveness, get the benefits from that while also having a little bit more soundness, both in coverage and against the run. I mean, this team finished 29th in run defense success rate last year. I mean, they were an absolute nightmare. And some of that is personnel driven, but I think some of it is also just the style of play that we saw from this team. So I think maintaining their edge while trying to steal back a little bit of soundness, that's the ideal way that this can work out. And I want to see how that all comes together over the first month of the year.
And I will say, I don't know what you're going to actually get out of Eric Kendricks as an individual player, but bringing in a guy like him, who was one of the best players in Zimmer's defenses a while ago, who very obviously understands what's going on here, that's a pretty good guy to come bring in, especially when your other linebackers are pretty young, might not know what's going on. You need to help communicate with the safeties. So they at least probably made a pretty smart signing there in that regard.
So what's yours? What do you watch in the first month of the season for the Cowboys here?
I mostly just want to see where we can get with this offensive line, because obviously they're going to have three new pieces with Guyton coming in, or I guess two, because they obviously two, because they lost Tyler Biotic. For a minute, I was thinking BB was going to be playing guard like he did in college, but that's not going to be the case. BB's playing center, but they bring in two new rookies. That is typically a kind of scary thing, but I will say that the Cowboys are very much earned the benefit of the doubt of like, yeah, they can replenish at the offensive line position. They've done it God knows how long, basically for the last decade or so. I think what's interesting is so last year the Cowboys had the second lowest pressure rate according to Sports Info Solutions. Granted, that is partly a Dak stat. He's very good at getting the ball out when he needs to. So there's zero doubt of that he has some effect there. And they were 16th in yards before contact on runs, which is like fine, but not great. I think when you add two new pieces, though, if you can at least get back to maybe top six or I guess bottom six in allowing pressure rate and then stay around the same range in terms of the run blocking. I think that would kind of be a win when you're adding in two rookies like this. So I'm just very curious to see if those guys can hold up. They've looked great in the preseason, especially BB, I think actually has looked really, really strong moving to center. So I'm optimistic, but I do want to see it in action.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. The early returns are very good. I mean, Tyler Guyton, I think you can say a lot of similar things about his development plan and what they need out of him that you could say about Tyler Smith. Comes in a little bit raw, has tons of tools, and they got Tyler Smith there in a hurry. I mean, he was a day one starter for them at guard and developed into a really, really good player really by the end of his first season. And what we've seen from Tyler Guyton in the first couple preseason games, he looks like a different player than he did his last year at Oklahoma in 1 year of offseason development with this team. And Mike Solari, their offensive line coach, he's been around forever. He's had a lot of success, and he's just the latest guy who seems to be getting a lot out of whoever walks through that room. And if they can figure that out, like if Guyton is passable for them from day one and BB is a solid center, like gives them close to what Biotish did over the course of the entire season, it alleviates a lot of the concerns I have about this offense. There are still some, and we'll dig into those. But, I mean, that's a huge box checked for this team potentially getting back into the same stratosphere they were on that side of the ball last year.
And I'll say, too, this is one of the few offenses where swapping out a center in terms of keeping the structure of things intact is really not a concern for me because Dak is just so good pre-snap, so good at setting protections. That bringing in a rookie there, I'm not like, oh, they're going to blow a bunch more protections. They're not going to know where to be. It's like, no, they have Dak back there. They're probably going to be fine in that regard. BB can just go play.
Yeah, and I was talking to Scott Tolzien, who's their quarterback coach, when I was out there, just about what they put on Dak's plate compared to some other quarterbacks around the league. And I mean, he has a lot of teams do this where the quarterback has the trump card, but Dak really does have more autonomy and control. I've surveyed a lot of people about this recently just because it's like a curiosity of mine, like how much are you actually giving the quarterback? And what we assume about Dak based on some of how demonstrative he is before the snap, I guess, let's say. I think that is right. I think they really do put a lot more on him than some of these other teams do. So I think that point is well-founded. All right. For each of these teams, we're talking about what we're worried about. So what is keeping you up at night with the 2024 Dallas Cowboys?
Are they actually going to be any better in the spine of the defense like you were talking about earlier? You know, I think theoretically they should be because you bring in a guy like Zimmer who's a little bit more no bullshit. You know, this is like everybody needs to be where they need to be, and we're gonna hold gaps. We're gonna do what we need to. We're gonna do what we need to do. It's just that like the body types, man, and the players, I'm just not 100% sure we're actually going to get there. Eric Kendricks, even at his best, truthfully, was never like a big take on blocks type of guy. Damon Clark, I think, has been up and down in terms of his ability to consistently read out plays and have the instincts to go hit. He will go hit, but just in terms of being in the right spot at the right time, I think he's been a little bit slow to the take. He's a young player, so we'll see. And then the defensive line, you know, they went out and signed Linval Joseph. Great, but it still
How old
feels
is
like a
Linval Joseph
Band-Aid
right now?
Dude, that's what I was gonna say. Is like it feels like a Band-Aid at this stage, right? I mean, he's been a Band-Aid player for like 2-3 years at this stage, and it's been nice, but it's just that's one of those signings that you make this late in the calendar where it's like, all right, we are so bad that we need anybody who could do this for us. So I'm very worried about the non-Linval Joseph defensive tackles holding up against the run.
Linval Joseph has now played on 4 teams since leaving the Vikings in 2019. Can you name those 4 teams?
I don't think so. There's no way. I don't think I could get even half of them.
He was on the Chargers for 2 years, which I sort of remember. Then he had that stint with the Eagles where him and Sue signed with the Eagles on like the same day.
Right. Yep.
I will give you $100 if you could tell me the team that he was on last year.
I don't even think I could try. Like I'm
the
sure.
Bills.
What?
I have no memory of this.
For how long?
I have no idea.
Was it maybe
Let's
like post
let's
Daquan
look.
Jones injury would be my guess?
Yeah, I mean that team had so many defensive injuries last year. I feels like everybody walked through that building. Let's take a look at this. He played 7 games for the Bills last year, one fewer than he did for Philadelphia. He started 8 games for the Eagles during that season, but not a ton of work. Let's see snap counts. He played 161 total snaps for the Bills over those 7 games.
I mean, that's like 20 something a game. That's
It's not,
I
not that it's not.
I completely memory hold that.
I have absolutely no memory of that. The point is, Week 9? Week 9 was his first game in Buffalo. Okay.
Wow.
So this is a situation where he's 35 years old. He's still younger than me, which I think that's probably my bar. Like if you're older than me, then it's over for you. But we're still talking about a guy who is deep into his career. And I don't know how much you can expect out of him at that stage. And like you said about Kendricks, like even what he was giving this team when he was playing at his best and giving this system isn't the sort of run defense that you're looking for here. So even if there's more soundness with what they're doing, I still think that it's reasonable to be concerned about what that group is going to look like. Mine here, I have a couple about what's keeping me up at night with the Cowboys. The first one has the erosion of this roster on the margins lock them into the same ceiling that we've seen over the last couple of years. And what I mean by that is they've lost edge depth over the past year. Dorrance Armstrong is gone. Dante Fowler is gone. Sam Williams got hurt during camp. We talked about the receiving talent being kind of chipping away at that. They're making big bets on a guy like Jalen Tolbert, a guy like Marshawn Nealon. And then, like you mentioned, the offensive line. And the early returns are good on guys like Guyton and Beebe, but they're really trying to land the plane here on a very small strip of land. That is what the Cowboys have done this offseason. To not add any pieces in free agency and bet so much on the people they had on the roster and this draft class, that is a very tough needle to thread. And there is a chance that they do it, but the margin for error they're leaving for themselves here, that's what worries me a little bit.
No, 100%. We kind of talked about this on the last show, but this is a team where the floor basically feels the same, right? Because the
Yeah.
offensive line, I'm kind of bullish on them, so they'll probably get close to what they were last year. Dak is Dak, CD, Micah's Micah. He still gives you those
So
top high plays, but
I kind of agree with that, but Tyron Smith played so well last year. So even if Tyler Guyton is good from day one for a rookie relatively, we're still not going to get anything close to what Tyron Smith gave the Cowboys last year play in and play out. I think BB has a chance to be within spitting distance of what Biotish was, but I don't want to underrate just how good Tyron Smith was last year while he was healthy for most of the season. Like Guyton can be a hit and still be a significant downgrade from what they were getting from that position last year.
that's totally fair. I might just be so Dak pilled that I'm like, he'll be enough to make up the gap there. Again, not that Tyron wasn't great, but it's like I have enough faith that Dak will be okay, at least in the not sink the team category.
Like you said, this team deserves a lot of benefit of the doubt with replacing some of these guys. But even if you want to look at it that way, and even if you want to spin it and say, okay, let's concede that they got hot in the draft, they're going to make this work. Jalen Tolbert's better than we thought. The other part of this that worries me was this offense seizing up at the end of last year. Is that a sign of what's to come? We saw them make some tweaks in the middle of the season that were hugely important for them. I think one of them was just the way that they were using CeeDee Lamb, right? He was a slot player for the most part before that disastrous just defenestration that we saw against the Niners. He was in the slot on 68% of his snaps. From week 6 to 18 after the bye, it was 48%. They're moving him around. They're using him more as like a true number one receiver all over the formation, and the results were incredible. I mean, he was one of the most dominant players in the league. There was also just more dynamic elements to the offense overall. Weeks 1 through 5, 41% of Dak's dropbacks had motion on them. Weeks 6 through 18, that went to 54%. The only guys in the NFL who had more total dropbacks using motion from weeks 6 through 18 last year than Dak were Tua and Patrick Mahomes. That's it. And you could feel that. Like the offense felt more dynamic. And it's not that complicated how this happened. They saw some of the shit that was going on around the league, mostly in Miami, and were like, oh, cool. What if we tried to do some of that stuff?
Yeah, credit to Mike McCarthy. I kind of thought he was past that a little bit of being able to innovate and do that, but maybe Dak got him there. I don't know what it is, but he's gotten there, and I'll give him credit for that.
So here's the problem with that, though. Doing that midseason and sprinkling a little bit of that in, you don't know what the counters of that need to be. So eventually they just ran out of road. Like everyone's going to talk about that Packers game. The game that sticks out to me, I watched it recently, watching them play against Buffalo late in the season. The Bills were just on their shit. Like they were suffocated during that game against the Bills. So a team with smart DBs, a team that is well coached on defense, just had answers for everything that they were trying to do. So that's my question again. Even if we're going to see a couple wrinkles early in the season that are born of some sort of creativity that they've seen around the league, and like, what if we tried some of this? I worry that what's coming from that building and the ability to kind of iterate on some of this stuff and keep evolving, how is that going to go over a 17-game season into the playoffs? Because if it's anything like it was last year, even if we see some kernels of new ideas, that stuff fizzled out by the end of the season. And I don't have a lot of evidence that I believe it should go differently this year.
My biggest thing is the personnel. Actually, like other than CeeDee Lamb, what are you scared of? You're not scared of them really running the ball with these running backs. Jake Ferguson is a solid tight end, but I don't think he's like
You're not a Fergie head?
not to that level. I mean, I do like him, but man, if he's your second best skill player, I think your skill group is not that great.
He probably is their second best skill player.
That's what I'm saying. And then like Brandon Cooks, again, cool role player at this stage in his career. But man, like it's just, I don't really think he scares you in that way. Whereas you look at all the other super innovative and creative offenses in the league, it's because they have some other second pitch player that they can go to. The Cowboys just don't have that. So it's kind of hard to pivot when there's no pivot points.
I enjoyed some of the one other thing I didn't mention in terms of what they were doing more of last year compared to other previous years, more play action. And I think that allowed it maybe not allowed, but I think it pushed Dak to be just a little bit more aggressive outside of the pocket. Like some of the work that he was doing outside of the pocket and on the move last year was unlike anything we'd seen over the past couple of years. Part of that is because he just wasn't healthy for long stretches of the past couple of years, but I liked the inclusion of more play action within this offense just because I do feel like getting Dak on the move just led to more explosives and just a different flavor that we'd seen from him in the past. So I do think there are changes that mattered and can carry over, but how long they last, that's what I'm worried about.
I'm with you on the play action though, because Dak will throw that shit. He like there is zero doubt about it. He's gonna throw that stuff. So I mean, if you give it to him, he'll take it. So I would like them to lean into that. I mean, that's what he did when he was first came into the league. Obviously, he's progressed miles beyond that, so he doesn't necessarily need it, but he will make those throws, and his arm is certainly good enough. So,
what are you most excited about watching with the Dallas Cowboys this season? We're doing this for every team.
What am I most excited about? I mean, it's we kind of just talked about it a little bit, but like Dak, he is a player who I just love watching so much. I've said this on a million shows, but he is in his brain. He thinks that he's Peyton Manning, and he's obviously doesn't quite have the arm, isn't quite as doesn't have quite the mental acumen that Peyton Manning did. But man, he's just in terms of style, the closest that we have in this league to a player like that. And I just think it's so fun to watch. And it's not just that it's fun to me, it's like honorable. Like you are willing to make these throws where you know full well something can go wrong, but you're just saying, nah, I'm better. It's a skill check. Like you're just skill checking the other guy, and you're saying, I can make this seam throw behind my own guy's helmet if I need to. I can pin a comeback route right where I need to. I can throw a dig route in between two people. I don't care. The fact that he's just so willing to make all of those throws, and because he's been so willing for 8 years now or whatever, he's gotten really dang good at them. It's fascinating to watch, man. He blows my mind.
I really enjoy him. I've always really enjoyed him. Part of me feels like the drumbeat from so much of the football internet about Dak over the last couple of years has like turned up my old man yells at cloud gene, where I just get into this like meatballish thinking where it's just like, I want to see him do it against better teams and I want to see him do it in the playoffs. Like I love watching him play. But last year specifically, if you look at the defenses that this team torched, they played a ton of terrible defenses.
Oh, yeah.
They were bad team merchants last year. They got pantsed by the Niners. They got the shit kicked out of them in the playoffs by the Packers. Like, I want to see him and this offense just carry that shit over to playing against the Niners in January. That's it. And I know that's like stupid sports radio bullshit, but like I've gotten to that place with this team because I don't, what matters before Thanksgiving, before Christmas, essentially, just almost doesn't track to me. I just don't even want to pay attention to it because I'm just going to get duped again.
Listen, I think that's fine. I think two things are true. One, Dak statistically in the playoffs is probably a lot better than people realize. And this was true of Tony Romo too. So I think this might just be like a Cowboys
How
curse
much is
thing.
that Tampa game from last year, though, or from 2 years ago?
That is probably his best game. And I'm not going to lie, it does help. The other thing I will say, this is definitely cope. I'm not even gonna deny it. That Green Bay game, I almost want to throw it out. It seemed from literally the first throw, him and CeeDee were just not having it, and it was truly one of the most inexplicable displays I saw from any team last year, where those two just from the jump didn't have it, and it was just I don't know. Like, is that just gonna happen again? That one to me seemed a lot less like this is gonna happen every year, but I don't know. I get it, but I still just love watching him play.
We've talked about a lot of these other ones. I'm excited about what Zimmer still has left as a DC. I'm excited about watching this young offensive line. I don't think we have to go over those again. Your most important supporting character for this year's Cowboys is
Mozzie Smith. And I know they just signed Linval Joseph, so this like kind of puts down the pressure a little bit on Smith, but he still needs to be a guy who can hold up against blocks. He was a guy who came into the league, I think like 330 pounds, and then they cut him down, which was really weird, which made more sense for Quinn's defense. I don't know if it makes as much sense for Zimmer's. I don't know exactly where he's gotten out at this point, but he needs to prove that he's a guy who can hold up against blocks, because they obviously have Odigizua on the other side, who is awesome at getting through the line and getting to the quarterback, not so great at holding up blocks. So they need Maisie Smith to be able to do some of that. I just, from what we saw from him last year, I don't think it was that encouraging. I'm obviously not giving up on him or anything. It's just, I think he really needs to take another step for me to feel good about where the interior of this defense is going to be.
The silver lining here is that with a lot of these highly drafted interior defensive linemen, it has taken a while. It's not something that happens immediately for a lot of these guys. And he has further to go than some of those other players taken in the first round, just based on what we saw last year. But it's certainly not a lost cause by any stretch when you consider the development timeline for other players at that position over the last 3 or 4 years. But I'm with you. I mean, when you draft a guy in the first round for that specific reason, like the role that he needs to play within your defense, and there's just a total void now because of what you got from him last year, it's a huge concern. I've got a few, like Jalen Tolbert we talked about, Terrence Steele. Like Terrence Steele playing closer to the level that we saw from him in 2022. He was hurt last year, and he was a negative. I mean, he went from being a guy who was worthy of that extension that they gave him 2 years ago to a player that was a concern for this offense at right tackle. So that's one that I would throw out. And then just whoever the other linebacker is next to Eric Kendricks. When I was there, it sounded like it was going to be Demarion Overshawn, who they drafted last year.
Really?
Yes. So that was when I was there. This was probably 4 or 5 days into camp. He was standing next to Eric Kendricks with the first team defense. And that was the word, is that he was going to be the other starting off-ball linebacker.
By the way,
whoever that is, that guy's very important.
Do you remember Demarion Overshown's college aesthetic at all, by chance?
I certainly don't. The fact that you think I would is hilarious.
Okay. He was the guy who you might recognize the picture if you saw it, from Texas. He was a linebacker, just armbands everywhere. Like it almost looks comical. I didn't love the way he played. So I'm very interested to hear that he might be the starting linebacker, especially because I kind of like Damon Clark. He's a guy who will go hit, which is kind of why I like him. That was just a random thought that popped into my brain.
I'm looking at it right now. Oh my God. It's incredible.
It's crazy, right? It's crazy.
As someone who definitely wore the stretched, like the very little Under Armour armbands when I was in high school, which was like 19, 20 years ago, I have to respect it. Like it would just be completely hypocritical if I was going to admonish him for wearing those. The fact that he has like 6 of them on each arm, though, it might be overdoing it a little bit.
It's truly ludicrous.
Oh man, this is incredible. I'm not even exaggerating. Like there are like 5 on each arm. I highly encourage you guys
I wasn't
to Google
kidding.
this.
I wasn't kidding.
Incredible. All right. What counts as a successful season in your mind for the 2024 Cowboys?
It's vague. I don't have a set goal for wins or anything like that. Literally, whatever it takes to get both Dak and the Cowboys to a spot where they feel like keeping Dak in town is the best move for everybody. That's it. I don't care if that means you win 2 playoff games. I don't care what the end game is. Like, they just need to get there one way or the other.
This is another one where I think it was when we were talking about the Saints. Is this success for Dennis Allen, or is this success for the future of the New Orleans Saints? That answer is the success for the future of the Dallas Cowboys. But for both the fan base and Mike McCarthy, you have to win the division, right? And I think you have to win a playoff game. That is, at the very least, if we're going to be, that's like success for everyone who roots for this team, a playoff win and playoff competence, I think has to be part of that equation. And the other kind of offshoot I had with this, just land the plane with this draft class. Like, have this draft class just be full of dudes in addition to winning a playoff game and potentially looking good doing it against a team that is not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, for each of these teams, we're doing an irresponsible player prediction for this season. What is yours for the Cowboys?
I'll be honest. I came close to what you did with the Saints, where it's like I just don't have one. There's a lot that I just don't strongly believe with this team, or like it already kind of has, like we've seen it. So I was like, whatever. It's not that interesting. Like, what am I going to say? Micah Parsons is going to get 16 sacks. This guy, okay, well, he's got close. Who cares? I will, however, say one way or another, Micah Parsons is going to get 3 interceptions. I don't know what Zimmer's going to do. He's going to do some crazy stuff. It might be on some screens. I couldn't tell you. He's never gotten a pick in his life in the NFL, but he's going to get 3 one way or another.
That's a weird one. That's
It's
a really
I don't
weird
even
one.
I'm telling you, I couldn't get to a take that I truly believed. So I was like, I'll just do something that's kind of fun.
All right, with mine, you look at what CeeDee Lamb did after the bye last year. He was on a 207 target pace from week 7 through 18, if you extrapolate that over a full season. So I think that there's a legitimate shot that we get to week 18 this year and we're talking about what CeeDee Lamb needs to do to get 2,000 yards. Like, I think he will be within striking range of 2,000 yards in the last week of the season.
I don't think that's crazy. I mean, they have less passing options than they had a year ago. I mean, not that like Michael Gallup was giving them a whole lot, but Gallup was a guy that Dak would throw at. Like, whether it was the greatest decision, Dak would throw him the ball. And so the fact that some of those targets are now voided and we don't really know what's going to go on with their wide receiver 3 spot, I can't imagine the tight ends are going to get that many more targets. I will say, how many targets do you think, or how many receptions do you think Zeke had last year?
Oh, it's way more than you thought. And the reason I know
lot.
this is because I had Ramondre Stevenson on multiple fantasy teams.
Okay.
I bet he had 35 catches last year.
51.
51?
Dude, it blew my mind. I
God.
remembered him being more of a piece
51.
of their passing offense than it seemed like he would have been going in. But I looked it up and it's 51. I was like, damn, really? Like, it just seemed crazy.
51
but
is crazy.
He did it a couple times in Dallas. I don't know if he's going to do it again here, but
that just tells you the state of that New England Patriots offense last year. The fact that Zeke Elliott at this stage of his career caught 51 passes.